Hello, Alex. How's it going?
Hello, Shamir. I'm so excited to be here. I know it's been taking a while to be able to get on the podcast, but I'm so happy to finally be here and have this conversation because I feel like more and more conversations about Web3 marketing should be held. And thank you for the invite.
Yeah, no, I know you do. And that's exactly what we're here for. So let's just dive right in and let's talk about Web3 and talk about marketing. I guess let's start from a personal perspective. Why? Why for you marketing, and why for you this wonderful industry of Web3, blockchain, crypto, whatever you want to call it?
I kind of wish I could say that I got in the web industry because I like money. I like money, or I came here for the money, but it wasn't exactly that. I actually came here for the tech, and then kind of the money motivation followed. Let's say I'm saying this because a lot of my speakers on the podcast say like, "Oh, I got in for the money." But what actually got me in was that I started working for a Web3 project that didn't even have an MVP. So that was interesting because I'm so used to working with founders, like early stage tech founders, but nobody who didn't even have an MVP. And then I moved to Barcelona with them. And long story short, they sent me to Avalanche Summit in 2022. And that was the moment that opened my eyes about the industry, about like, what can I do about, oh, there's actually more. It's not just a bunch of developers doing something I don't really understand and doing integrations that I can't even name. And I think like from there, it's a snowball effect, and it's like a rabbit hole that like you keep getting into, and it's like never finishing, and it's so amazing and it's so exciting. And what I call Web3 for me as a marketer is the new shiny thing, to be honest with you. Because I feel like somebody mentioned, or like somebody said on my LinkedIn at some point, they, when asked like, why did you get into Web3? They said, I'm so sick of doing marketing for dental clinics and lawyer practice. And it's basically, it's exactly that. I feel like I've been doing that for so long, and it's always the same thing. And it's always like, you use the same techniques and stuff. And I feel like in Web3, they're the news, the tools are new, the audiences are new. Every time I even get somebody on the podcast and I'm like, oh, what do you think of this? They tell me, oh, this is so overrated already. I'm like, I only had 3 episodes about it, or everybody's been using that and now it's already done. And I feel like it's such an interesting industry to be in, and it's a really, really good moment to be in the industry. That I feel like there's room for everybody. It's exactly what we were talking about before we started recording this. That there's room for everybody, and this is actually what excites me to keep building in the space and to be in the space as well.
Okay, so you covered the Web3 component. What about marketing in general? Why have you, Alex, kind of gravitated into this field in the first place?
Well, happily for me, well, I graduated. I have a bachelor degree in communication and PR. So in theory, that was what I wanted to do. Then I realized, I remember like I hated it the first year of uni, and I was like, what am I doing here? Nothing is for me. But then I realized it's actually really cool. I got my first job and I moved to Malaysia, and then I was like, oh, maybe actually it's something that I want to continue doing. So that's what I've been doing for all this time, for the last, I don't know, 13 years more or less. And obviously, if I got into Web3, it was more like a normal transition for me. I didn't have to become something that I know nothing about. I was like, well, that's my expertise. That's what I've been doing so far. I'm sure that I can definitely replicate some of the strategies or some of the things that I know into Web3. Unfortunately, I mean, marketing is such a vague and big thing, right? And I feel like in Web2, I was kind of pushed to become the growth marketer because that's what everybody wanted. In Web3, you're kind of pushed to become the growth marketer, but also the community manager, the content writer. If you look at all the JDs right now, it's only about that. And I feel like with somebody who has my background, it's such a difficult moment or place to kind of fit in, to see like, oh, there's actually more. You can actually do a lot more stuff. You don't always have to do just growth. Not all marketers need to be growth marketers. Not all marketers need to be community managers or community builders or content writers. But I mean, I think by building, by like moving my audience from like LinkedIn to Twitter, it got me to understand that like I think there's so much there, and I can build something that where I'm not being pushed to become anything that I don't want to become, and I can build a community by myself, and I can play around and actually have fun. And for me, this was actually the most important thing, to be able to have fun, because I'm already like, I'm getting older, I'm not getting any younger, and at the end of the day, a job is just a job, right? Like I don't have to die for it, and I want to make sure that as long as I live, and for as long as I work, I enjoy or as much as possible what I do. So I think that's kind of where my motivation stands.
Love it. Fun. So fun is definitely a huge factor, I think, in Web3. Besides fun, how is Web3 marketing, or maybe just the landscape, different in your mind than the traditional Web2 landscape?
I think it's exactly what I was mentioning. The most important thing, like one of the things that drew me actually to Web3, is that when I got to do marketing in Web2, I don't know if you remember 2014, 15, 16-ish. There was so much, we used to talk so much about like Facebook communities and like engaging people there and like strategies to grow and so on. And I feel like Web2 kind of forgot about that. Web2 is so much about like driving numbers and doing ads and so on. They don't really have communities anymore. Whereas I mean, there are a few exceptions, obviously. But in Web3, this is the most important driver. And that's what I like to do in Web2. So I think like for me, being in Web3 right now and going back to kind of the roots, I really, really enjoy that. And I also feel like Web2 has such a standardized thing to do. Oh, we try content. Oh, this doesn't work. Oh, we try partnerships. Oh, we try ads. We try PR and so on. So they're like all these standard things that are being done. Whereas in Web3, you can be a lot more creative. And you can test out all these new tools, and you can test out all these new ideas, and you can figure out like different types of ways to engage your community, the important word. That I think that's kind of how everything, this like sectors, I don't know how to call them, differentiate themselves. And yeah, that's kind of where I stand and what keeps my motivation up.
Yeah. So, okay. So you feel right at home. That makes a lot of sense. I think what Web3 brings to businesses is, to your point, your community suddenly becomes your shareholders, right? There's almost like, besides the back and forth and how people are creating synergy together and cross-pollinating with ideas or their vision or what's good or what's bad, essentially there's almost like a governance component to it as well, right? Where they become the people that you need to serve. And I think you make a really strong point that as a marketer, you can't ignore that. Like that is a huge piece of marketing, just like having the right product to serve them is a big piece of marketing, just like knowing what levers to pull, whether it's ads or LinkedIn or Farcaster or TikTok, right? So figuring those things out, like it's much more intertwined, which I think maybe this actually explains your question about growth. It almost requires a holistic understanding of the landscape of what your business's ecosystem, I'm saying that in kind of quotation marks, looks like. But I do totally agree that in Web3, that's a huge difference. Or differentiator between that marketing and Web2. Okay, so you have a fantastic podcast. I've listened to a couple episodes, and I'm going to listen to the rest. So it's called Out of the Ordinary. We'll share the link in the description below. What can you tell me about the podcast? I'm curious, about just learning what motivated you to start it. And then B, let's dig into maybe some conversations that you've had. I'd love to hear some insights or things that you've learned either directly from your guests or from the process of the podcast itself.
I think it's a conversation that it's never ending. So initially, I started this podcast because I was trying to land a job in Web3. After the experience that I had in Barcelona, I moved back to Bucharest, and everybody was like, I was having interviews left and right, and then all the Lunatara crash happened, and then FTX happened, and then nobody was hiring. And you can actually see from like August 2022, everything was just going down. It was my first bear market. I was like, what is going on in this industry? I'm just trying to get in. I'm just trying to like do my thing. And I'm like, how hard can it be to land a job here? Extremely
Not the best
hard.
time. It was not the
Not
best
the
time.
best time as well. I had to learn it like
The
on
hard
my
way.
own, let's say. And then everybody's like, oh, you don't have enough skin in the game. And I was like, well, I'm trying to pay my bills. I'm not trying to trade right now or to test all these platforms. And some of these like marketing platforms, for example, you can't test if you don't have a product or you don't have like a campaign to test it with. So you can just like look around. That's the best you can do. So I said, okay, I'm gonna launch this podcast. I was already in contact with a bunch of marketers, and I was like, there's no centralized place where everybody can come and like share their experience. I they're also like there are some communities that were like quite exclusive, and I couldn't get in. I was like, so where do I learn from? I'm gonna build my own thing. I've never done podcasting before. I used to do like a lot of like long form YouTube videos, TikToks, Insta reels and stuff, but it bored me because I really love being in front of the camera. I have to admit this, but it was just me in front of a camera all the time, and I really like speaking to people. Um, and what happened was that once I started doing this like episodes, I started getting a lot of requests from all sorts of marketers and all sorts of like PR agencies like trying to pitch me speakers. And obviously, I can only accommodate as much as I can accommodate, because like if this would become my full time job, probably I can do like a lot more. But I wanted to, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, I wanted it to be fun. So I hired an editor, and that was like the first thing I wanted to get out of my mind. I didn't want to spend a lot of time like editing, because I wanted to like make sure that I keep the fun in this creative process, because this was my platform, this was my creative place, and so on. So this was one of the things. Like something I've noticed is that it is probably the best way if you want to build relationships with people in the space, and if you cannot go to events and so on, it's probably the best thing you can do to build relationships with people. Especially because a lot of the times you would go to, I used to go to a lot of events, on like live events on LinkedIn, and everybody's like, yeah, build relationships, slide into people's DMs. Like, nobody cares about you. It's just me. So it's like me and a thousand other people that wants to speak to them. So, but if I right now, if I slide into people's DMs and I'm like, hey guys, or hey X, I'm Alexandra, I'm running this like super successful podcast, do you want to come on the show? They 9 out of 10 times they will say yes. So this is the best thing to do that, and to build this relationship. Some people don't really appreciate it, unfortunately. It is what it is, in the sense that sometimes, like when I speak to speakers, they try to like work with me. If I speak with PR agencies that are pitching me speakers, they're like, no, we don't want to pay, we don't want to mint, we don't want to do a campaign, we don't want to like, I'm like, we just want to share knowledge. I'm like, you and like everybody else in the industry. So like, bring me something,
Right.
like let's work, let's like bring your community together, let's bring my community, let's see like what we can do to engage these people to make this episode like as successful as possible. Because otherwise you just grow your name on my with my work, because that episode is going to stay there like for the longest time. So that's an issue I have with the industry. I don't know exactly if that's like that's what's happening in Web 2 as well, but I'm just going to leave it there at Web 3.
So far, you've recorded how many episodes? Do you know?
I'm about like 60.
Okay, okay. That's a respectable number. And out of the 60, I mean, I'm sure you've had some highlights and lowlights. Why don't you share some of the highlights? Maybe, again, insights that you learned from guests, hacks, shortcuts, whatever you think is worth sharing. I'd love to hear it.
So I have a couple of things that I'm really into right now. And so I think like during this process, I was kind of YOLOing, trying to figure out like what is because my podcast is my product, right? So I wanted to make sure that I deliver the best quality. And right now, like a lot of my audience on Twitter, for example, is asking me for case studies. So that's kind of what I'm into a lot. One of the best episodes I had was with the chief strategist, Smart Token Labs, Matt Sweezy, and basically he spoke about how they got to, oh my god, I forgot the number. It was like I think 2 million users or something like this, maybe more, in 4 months with zero marketing. So they had like an entire campaign. He spoke about like how the breakdown of the entire strategy on like how they did it. Because it's like, oh, how much money did you spend? Did you use any PR? Did you do this? And you're like, no, no, no. I'm like, okay, so how did you do it then? Yeah, and I feel like it was such an incredible campaign to learn from.
And what, in a nutshell, if you can convey it here in this podcast, it sounds like anti-marketing almost. Like what you're saying, it sounds fascinating because it's not what you would expect to hear, right, from
Exactly.
whoever's in charge of strategy. What was the spin there? Like how did they manage to do it?
They had a good team. So they had about like 10 people, if I remember correctly, working on this campaign. And basically what they did, it was a point system. They were rewarding their users and their news users for every single action that they were doing. So instead of like using third party platforms, which would have given them some leverage, but they wouldn't like well prepared, or like they wouldn't be able to track everything that they wanted. They basically built the entire point system within their own platform, let's say. So they would incentivize
Interesting.
people to go on their Twitter. They would have like 3,000 people attending their Twitter spaces. They would incentivize people for like commenting on Discord, but not like shitty comments, not just like yes, no, thank you. So like, like insightful stuff, like being able to really participate. And basically from what he told me, uh, they didn't rely on anything else. I think I remember the name, the number right now. I think it was like 2.5 million users in 4 months, and they were like looking forward to growing even more. And I think for them it
And
was
these are Web3 users. These are not
yeah,
what we'd call Web2. Like these are actual on-chain
exactly.
corresponding people. That's
So
incredible.
one of my concerns for things, for example, there is like, okay, so you incentivize these people all the time, but like, aren't you afraid they're gonna like
Stickiness.
drop when
Yes.
you're gonna stop incentivizing? And he's like, no, H&M does this all the time with like giving people like vouchers and stuff. I don't know. It's like, so this happens so much in Web2 anyway. And basically what he said is that like at the end of the campaign, they basically launched a game, and I think about like 900 something thousand users participated
Wow.
in this game that they launched, and they became like one of the top on Polygon. But basically, this is the kind of examples that I'm looking for, and everybody wants to learn from. I've also had programmatic ad networks because I wanted to understand like how do people use that, why do they use it for, and so on. Because for example, like I had like three so far, and they're all pretty different. They're also like in different stages of development. They serve different audiences. They serve different things. They're being built a bit differently. So I think it's nice to kind of present the tools as well. And I think one of the most important lessons out of everything that I've seen so far is that maybe there are two actually. One of them is that you need to do a lot of reiterations until you figure out if you have a good product and a product market fit. I think pretty much everybody that came on the podcast strive to build a good product. So it wasn't just like hype. And the second thing is that you need to do a lot of reiterations as a marketer to figure out like what sticks, what works best to be able to replicate from there. So I think this would be like two of the most important lessons that I've learned in these like 60 episodes. But obviously, shilling here, I invite everybody to take a look at some of these episodes because I feel like they're very insightful, and I think I try to keep them as educational as possible. So
I've taught lean marketing, what I call lean marketing, which really kind of just borrows from agile and kind of the lean methodology of build, measure, learn, which, historically it started on the manufacturing plant. I don't know if you know the story. It started with Toyota, and then gradually, right, it came into product development. And I feel like the last decade or even decade and a half with the rise of Web 2, essentially, and now Web 3, things, and you mentioned this before, right? Things move so fast that you cannot just say, okay, this is what I'm doing, and then, set it and forget it. You always need to start and get and then view and then get back to the drawing board and then continue and optimize. And it's this constant build, measure, learn iteration for sure. So it sounds like your guests have validated it. So, okay. So both the podcasts, you and I, we talked a little bit about brand building in Web3. A podcast, whether this or yours, is obviously a great way to do that. We talked a little bit about events as a way to do that. How do you kind of view brand building within Web3, whether for a company or whether for an individual who is looking to make a name for her or himself?
I actually recorded, I was a guest yesterday on somebody else's podcast, and we spoke exactly about that like podcasts are
so you already have the answer then.
Yeah, kind of.
You just spit it out without thinking.
Because I feel like podcasts are a great way to build your brand. I know Web3, at least until recently-ish, so let's say 2 years, a lot of the conversations you would see would be like, oh, the team is Anon. You would tell people, hey, Anon, do this. I'm like, unless you're in boys club right now, like, I don't know if like Anon is still a thing in Web3, because like as decentralized everybody wants it to be. I think like putting a face to a project and to really understand that there's somebody behind it, not just like somebody who's going to scam you. I think it's very, very important, especially after the recent situations with FTX and so on. But I think there's this thing called the founders funnel, and I think a lot of founders in the space should be paying a lot more attention to that. I've heard a lot of them say, "Oh, I don't have time to spend time on Twitter. Oh, I don't think this would work. Oh, I just have a content manager that like produces content for me from time to time, and so on." There's so many examples of people that have built like a reputation of themselves, and they drive the name of the company with them up. So this would be because the page would never have the same reach that you have as a profile. Either, doesn't matter if it's on LinkedIn or Twitter, it's Farcast or whatever you're building. But I think this is such an important driver to build credibility, for you to endorse the product, to show how people are using that, to build hype around it, to build a community around it, and so on. And if I'm not mistaken, I've also heard stories in which the founder built such a strong brand that it counted as community or proof of how do you call that? It's not proof of work. It's anyway, it's proof of that like the product works, or like whatever you're building works, because they had such a strong presence, and they were able to like fundraise based off that. And an example of that I think is Clutch. I can't remember the name of the founder right now. I'm really, really bad with names. But basically, what Clutch did, they were building a wallet for women. I don't think it was just for women, but I think they kind of marketed it that way. And the founder built I think at that point she had like over 100,000 followers on TikTok. And basically, she was doing content around like Clutch and around like the Web3. That when she started fundraising, she leveraged that as being like the audience that she's starting with, because she didn't have like such a big community. She didn't have money to spend on to hire somebody to build the community around the product. And I know for sure she raised money with that. So I think this is not proof that building a personal brand in Web3 is important. Then I don't know what is.
Sure. Do you think it might have to do with kind of how Web3 has evolved? So if I rewind 3 years to, let's take it like peak NFT mania, there you typically actually had these anons who put together a series of NFTs, and maybe in best case scenario made some promises around the type of utility that series will provide down the road. And they were able to kind of build these communities around hype and price go up and expectations of utility, but also a community that rallies around these characters, or typically profile pics, right? PFPs. Do you think, and you know, that bubble has since popped. I'm, by the way, for the record, a big believer in NFTs, but that's a separate conversation. I think that correction needed to be made 3 years ago, right? Do you think it might be because we've kind of transitioned into a more mature industry where the community doesn't just like, it's hard to rally around a technical product. It's almost like Simon Sinek's talk. I don't know if you know, start with why, right? Like people need a why to form around, right? To kind of maybe articulate what they know and what they feel, and then what they can gather around. You saw it with Vitalik, I think, very early with Ethereum. And I mean, if you look at, I was at Algorand, Silvio Macaulay, our founder, MIT professor, Algorand would not have been Algorand without Silvio kind of just out there, both putting himself on the line and explaining why this technology works, and also kind of articulating the vision, right? So like, it's much easier to fall in love with Silvio or with Vitalik, is my point, than to fall in love with a piece of technology, right? It's much easier to fall in love with a vision than with, oh, I log in here and this is how I transact. Like, that's the mechanics, right? There's always needs to be a why. Do you think this could be kind of an industry of, or a mark of our industry maturing, or is it something else? Maybe.
I think, in my opinion,
You
it's
know?
like two things. And I was even
Yeah.
thinking, like, do you think like Ethereum would have been Ethereum without Vitalik? We would never know,
No.
but probably not. Do you
I
think
probably not.
Podcaster would have been built the way it's being built right now? Like, it would have had so much hype if Dan Romero wasn't posting like a quadrillion thousand times on Podcaster a day? Probably not.
Nope.
So I think there are like two things. I think it's, first of all, the scare that we've been scammed so many times. And there's still, like, you can see, we're not still in bull market right now, but scams are everywhere right now. And I can see it. Like before, almost nothing was happening. It was like chill times. I was like, well, it's almost impossible. But right now there are like so many different ways to get scammed. And even as a Web3 user, that like, if you don't pay attention to things like the little things, it's you're gonna get your wallet like drained like right away. And I've heard like so many stories. I think like Coinfessions, if you go on Twitter, you're gonna start crying if you hear all these stories of people losing money in crypto. But at the same time, I think it's also the fact that like the industry is maturing. Are we where I would like it to be, or like where many of us would like it to be? Probably not. But I also think it's a very important step, or a stepping stone to see that I think we're heading in the right direction. And I think the fact that like all these very big people, and all these like very big founders are putting their name out there and they're not being anonymous and so on. I think it's exactly like, I don't know, Microsoft or Disney using
Right.
the metaverse, for example. You small companies can use it, but it's never going to get as much hype if somebody bigger with like a bigger reputation would come on and show that they're using that technology. And I think it's exactly the same here.
Right. So you're going in kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You're saying, well, it's not even necessarily the self-fulfillment, which is at the top of the pyramid. It's just a bare basic of trust. Like, this is not a scam. Therefore, we can unify around it. Interesting.
Yeah. And you see that, like, I don't know if it happens to you, but it happens to me many times. I was even, just to give an example, I first of all, like, if you get pitched on the podcast, and like I feel like right now this is one of the strategies that a lot of PR agencies are employing. Like, oh, you should go on podcast, build reputation, and maybe it's gonna drive users as well, or like especially if it's a B2B thing. So like, why do you think all these people are being pitched? Build a reputation, right? Also, just to give an example, I have a friend who has an agency, and he texted me yesterday. He's like, "Hey Alex, like, how much money would you charge me if I bring you this guy on the podcast?" And I'm like, he's like, oh, he was like, well, he doesn't have much to talk about because his ecosystem is kind of dead-ish. people are really hating on him. So I'm trying to help him kind of revive somehow, or like talk some things out. So basically, if he wouldn't try, or like if there wasn't a person, probably we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So it is, it's work in progress, I guess. But I
Sure.
think like trust is very important in the space, and it's something that I think like more and more of us are striving towards.
Okay, so I think maybe skepticism is one of the challenges that our industry generally has always faced. Let's face it, from the first days of Bitcoin transactions and Silk Road and how Bitcoin was initially used to DeFi and NFT rug pulls, and I mean today you have meme coins, right? That's Meme coins are the new NFTs. In my mind, as long as people know what they're getting into, as long as they know it's a casino, as long as they know that there isn't necessarily a lot of substance and that you can make a lot of money in a very short period of time, or you can lose all your money in a very short period of time, I'm okay with that. That's very, very different from clicking a link and phishing scams and all the other kind of garbage rug pulls, right, where the intent isn't there behind. So I totally agree that having kind of founder at the spearhead, right, of the community, of the product, and again, like in my mind, what's important, yes, this establishes trust, so that's on the foundational level, but it also establishes a vision. It also establishes a momentum of going forward. And in my mind, in Web3, that's really a factor because of the type of people who are into this industry, right? We're typically the innovators, the early adopters, right? The people who will use this tech, not for what it is, but for what it can be.
I wanted to add here two things, if you allow me.
Of course.
So first of all, I wanted to say that I think there are like two types of marketers that can market these kind of things. Or like there are two types of marketers out there. They're the degens. I'm not a degen, and I can never call myself a degen, and I don't really understand degen. And it is what it is. And I think that's totally fine. This is first of all, like I think something we should be discussing and should not be putting under, or like getting under the rug, that like, oh, if you're not a degen marketer, you cannot like don't have a spot in Web3. I think yes, you do. There's so many of us that like that are not degens, and I think we can still do an amazing job. This is one. The second thing, I think the degens, I think they can market the meme coins. And as I said, I think like they're the, in my opinion, in my very personal opinion, okay, so like do not kill me, like not you, but the audience, is that I think they're the next scam. And I think that's why I'm not so into it, and I really believe in like really nicely built like good products that can be that are sustainable, let's say. But at the same time, I think all of these users that are trading meme coins and so on, they kind of know what they're getting themselves into. And a very fun fact, because I work with traders and like sometimes I hear things that I'm like absolutely shocked, is that I was talking yesterday with some of my friends, and this friend of mine, he told me like, do you know why in Poland they trade so much, and if they why they're like one of the top countries in Europe? Do you know?
No idea. Why?
So
Poland?
apparently, so apparently, gambling has been banned for the last couple of years in Poland. So how do people do that? Continue that in crypto, and probably meme coins is
So
like
interesting.
one of the things one of the things that they use. So I found that like quite funny and
Fascinating.
fascinating at the same time.
Yeah, so you're almost saying it fulfills a need. Humans need to gamble, and if the government doesn't allow it, figure out a way to do it.
Yeah.
Love it. Let's talk about growth tools. So, as someone who's interviewed many, many companies in the space and is kind of out there, actually, you mentioned this. Justin Vogel, who we both know of Safari, shout out to Safari and Justin, they recently came out with a Web3 Martech report. Are there any tools or insights or thoughts that came to mind as you reviewed that?
Justin, the list is not complete. First of all, I think the list should also be added with like all this like podcasts, or like wannabe, or like podcasts that are raising, yours including mine, and so on, because I think they're a very, very good tool. I think this list is made mostly for like seasoned Web3 marketers. And there are a lot of like people in my audience, for example, that are just getting into Web3 and they want to
Sure.
understand a bit the market better. So I don't think like just addressing the seasoned marketers or the ones that are lucky enough to have been around for like one or multiple cycles. That's not what, then they're not the only audience we should be addressing. So that's one. One of the fun facts I found though is that if you give me a second, I'll take a look. So apparently in 2011, there were 150 tools. And right now in 2024, there are 14,106, which shows, I think, that like how big I mean, they're not obviously not all Web3, but not, we don't need to be using only Web3 native tools that can help us in our day to day as marketers. But I found that information quite interesting. Some of the things that I've tried, and for me were like really cool, and something I've been digging quite a lot into is their content creation platforms that are Web3 native, especially because my audience is very into like this kind of tools, and I want to make sure that I give them some sort of experience to through that. So something that I haven't used, but I mean, I used it for my audience, but I've used it quite a lot, and like huge fan. PoApp. So shout out to Jay and the team. I think they're doing an amazing job. Something that I've also looked into is like how to token gate my the upcoming community that I want to launch. So some of the tools that I've looked into are Collabland, Magnetic XYZ, and Unlock Protocol. These are three tools that I've looked quite a lot into to figure out like which ones would serve best my needs at this specific moment. And then I've also tried like Queston and Galaxy for some campaigns, and for some proof of participation, because I think like I'm running this how do you call that, some Twitter spaces. I've been doing some Twitter spaces with this game that I absolutely love. It's called World Challenge Game, and one of the things I like about them is that they have like a board game that they translated into like a physical board game that they translated into Web3 as well. So you can like play multiple things. You can own an NFT. So it's like it's actually for everybody. It's not just like all these games that have their shootings and guns and things that I think women mostly don't play, let's say, or like would not be appropriate for kids. And I also want to give like a shout out to the guys from Xcohost, because I know that they've put so much effort into building a product. I don't know exactly if the product is like there yet, because I know like every time I speak to them, they're like, "Oh, we've been building." I took a look, I took a sneak peek of their latest version. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. And something else that I know that they're doing is that they're looking for, or like they're launching some cohorts of moderators for all the spaces that are being hosted there. So I think this is going to be an amazing opportunity for content creators like me, like you, and others. And
So wait, what
obviously,
is the tool itself? What's it called,
so
and what does the tool do?
X co-host, and basically
X co-host.
I think the subscription was about like $500 a month. And instead of for you to hire somebody to like organize Twitter spaces for you and to become a moderator and to look for speakers, da, 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 you just like list your space there, like at the topic, and people can apply to become speakers. So basically, you can find speakers a lot faster. You can produce a lot easier all these spaces at like much faster rate. So I think that's pretty amazing.
Very cool.
And obviously, one of the things that I've been using quite a lot is pods.media. Because right now you can mint the episodes there, you can make them collectibles, you can generate community engagement campaigns. One of my latest campaigns with Cookie 3, for example, it's we sold out like 200 NFTs in about like 2 weeks. I think we could have like pushed a lot harder. But
Incredible.
it was such a great experiment for me to show that as a content creator, this could be a platform that I could be using a lot more. And right now I have that as a case study that I think speaks volume about like the opportunities in the space.
Fantastic. Yeah, the what you described about the growth of the MarTech landscape, it's funny because I actually, when I taught marketing, or when I talked about marketing, I had the slide which showed how in 2011 they came out with this report that mapped it, similar to what Justin is doing in Web3, and there were, to your point, 150 companies. And I remember as a young marketer back then, I saw this and I was like, "Holy shit, this is amazing." I'm going to make a point because I want the edge as a marketer, right? So I'm going to make a point to go and learn about every single one of these companies. And I did. I did, like that first report. And then a year later, it doubled. And a year later, it doubled. And it kept growing until, to your point, 2024. There are 15,000 Web 2 and Web 3 probably is, combines them, MarTech companies. It very, very quickly, it became analysis paralysis. It was like, okay, there's too much. And if you notice, what that requires of a marketer is almost the discipline and the foresight to, I think, look around and ask people, what are you using? What are you finding effective? How are you growing? How are you doing it? And again, it kind of spins back to reputation, right? Like having the right reputation, and that's how you can make a decision, because no one person can know all those 15,000 companies that keep growing. And if it's fair to compare, and which I think it is, then in Web3 we're going to see similar growth. It might not look exactly the same, I have a feeling, because I think we're going to see Web 2 and Web 3 essentially just kind of integrate, right? So you're not going to be able to say, oh, that's a Web 3 MarTech company, and that's a Web 2 MarTech company. They're all going to mesh at a certain point in time if this industry survives. But it's a really, really fascinating process. You touched a lot of really interesting points. I'd like to maybe start with advice for marketers getting into Web3. You mentioned that Justin's report, is kind of more for the seasoned marketers. For any new people into marketing, right? Like young professionals, students, or maybe even seasoned Web 2 marketers looking into Web 3 and trying to make sense of it all. What advice can you give them?
Be curious, network, build a reputation, build your personal brand. I think like this is the best advice that I could give to anybody. And if there are two places that I would direct anybody to go to, I know there was also a marketing course. I'm not so sure how up to date is, and if Monica is still selling that. But
Okay.
there are two places that still have up to date content. Obviously, your podcast, my podcast, and also, and I'm saying that, like, I'm saying my podcast because my goal from the beginning was to kind of try to merge the two worlds, make sure that like I explain some things, or like a part of the conversation is like easier to understand for anybody, and then we dig a bit deeper into some stuff that are be for more like seasoned marketers, you want to call them like this. Another resource would be the marketing DAO. I know Paul is like really trying hard to like put together like all sorts of lists, and for example, like I had a chat with him I think last week, and he was telling me that he's trying to put together like a list of like marketing chats from like the biggest conferences in Web3. And I think this is pretty amazing, because I think this would appeal to pretty much anybody in the space. It doesn't matter like how much experience you have. So I think that this would be the resources that I would say. And obviously,
I just looked it up. You can love it. Yeah, I think DAOs as guilds, as networks of professionals around certain things are. I think that's one of the first use cases we're going to see. I mean, we are seeing it. And I think that's it's going to keep gaining more traction. Let's talk about women. So you and I, we this came up during our first conversation, I think, right? And we were looking around the room. This might have been at ECC, and everyone were crypto bros, myself included. I can't help it, right? I don't know if I'd call myself a bro, but I am, a guy, and I'm in crypto, and I'm a lot of people look like me. So this is, to me, this is a challenge of the space. It's a challenge of tech in general. I think it's exacerbated in Web3. I'm curious, looking at you, when you first came into the space, did you find this intimidating? Did you find it as an opportunity? And then kind of, now fast forward to today, how can we get more diversity, more, and this is cultural, and this is, gender, and this is really everything. How can we kind of get there as an industry and not be so homogenous, which is we currently are?
Well, first of all, sorry to disappoint. I would not call you bro.
Okay, thank you.
I think like you're just a crypto guy, which is totally fine.
Just a crypto guy.
Right. That's you should take that as a compliment, because I think not many people can say that. There's so many things to be told, to be talked about here. There are a couple of resources in Web3 and communities for women in Web3 where like they should feel safer to learn and so on, such as like Shi-Fi, Crypto Girls Club, maybe a bit of Boys Club as well. But I think the first two would be like my go-to place. It's integrated and I think this would be like the first step to educate women into Web3, to figure out or to see that the industry is not like this huge monster that like with full of tech that nobody can understand. And I think the majority of women, at least that are going through Shi-Fi, they're being absolutely fascinated about like what they're learning and the fact that like they have this like journey, and they can meet at events IRL, like ACC was one of them with the Shi-Fi Summit. Like, oh my God, I know you from Twitter, or like I'm building this, can you help me, and so on, because everybody's like so supportive and friendly. And I feel like sometimes like the tech world in general, not just Web3, I've seen that in Web2 as well, it can be a bit savage. At the same time, situations like you go to an interview and people, men, let's say, I don't want to call it, it's actually men, they're not very nice to you. And I think sometimes they say things like, I don't think they would say to a man just out of respect. But I think sometimes they just say things that they don't really think. Like they don't think it through before they get it out of their mouths. And you're like, what are you saying? One of the
that's just a guy quality, though, isn't it? Like I think a lot of guys are like this. Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it's a quality, but sometimes it's not, because sometimes it can be very, very offensive. And
of course.
One of the examples I have is that I was talking with Zoe from Crypto Girls Club about this in one of my episodes. It was like an episode in which we bitched about like how hard it is to be a woman in Web3 with very concrete examples and like what we can actually do about it. And one of the examples she was giving was that she was a moderator at this, I think it Denver this year. And she was now wearing shoes. And then somebody came up to her like right after they finished the panel, telling her, I think you should get some shoes because it will affect your ovaries. I'm like, what are you saying? Like, what kind of like, why? Just like, just keep it for yourself. Okay. Like you don't like me. You think this wouldn't be good for my ovaries, whatever. Like, or why are we talking about my genitals? First of all, like, why is this a conversation? This is the kind of examples that I'm referring to, or the fact that I've heard so many times people tell me, oh, it's a lot easier to grow a reputation in Web3 or like on Twitter just because you're a woman, right? Since when being a woman was easier? I don't get it. Not in my world, maybe in your world, but this not in my world. So yeah, like I think women face this kind of situations, and but at the same time, I'm seeing some sort of effort. Obviously, getting a moderator, a woman, or like having a panel full of women, or not full of women, but like at least a woman, like amongst like some men. I don't think this is the way to go. I really believe in like meritocracy, and I think women should go there because they deserve it, not because they're a woman, not because of their gender,
sure.
And vice versa. But I think seeing more women, these women communities that are supporting to each other, more women founders, more money towards women founders that are building things. I think this should be like a healthy way to go, and to kind of like feature them and talk more about them. But as I said, like put them in front because they deserve it and because you believe they can actually bring some value. Not because, as I was told in an interview, I would like to bring a woman in my marketing team because I think I need like a woman eye on my stuff. Like, come on. I mean, again, if you think this, like, keep it for yourself. Don't tell this to me. I've also spoken to a recruiter recently who told me, it's a lot harder to get on the job in Web3 as a woman. And I'm not saying this to defend you, to offend you, but it is what it is. And you know this. Like, what can I say? If even like the most seasoned recruiters tell me this, all I
Yeah.
can try is like do my best, try to build as many relationships as possible, try to build like genuine as possible, because I think I built my entire reputation of this podcast, of the fact that like it's me being me, and I'm not like pumping my numbers, and I'm not like using lies, and I'm not like showing skin or doing stuff just to draw attention. And I think this, I hope, will get me far, even if it's gonna be at a slower pace. But I own it. Like, I need to own this. Like, it's my journey. I prefer it this way, and I think there are like a lot more women in the space that share the same opinion, I guess.
Yeah. Be your authentic self, unapologetically. I truly believe that. And about what you said really resonated with, I think, my how I started my journey in the space. So I started going to meetups, and then I started organizing meetups, and it took years. It really took years until I started kind of, meeting the right people and the right opportunities kind of, landing at my doorstep. But all of this was through faith and just a belief that as long as I am consistently growing and learning and providing value to the people around me, as a non-technical marketer, in my case, it really was connecting people and connecting people to each other and connecting people to information through meetups, through hackathons, whether virtual or IRL. That's what ultimately, I think, drove those opportunities. And I think another really important thing that, especially for people who are starting their journey in the space, to understand is the growth or the outcome is not, it doesn't grow linearly, right? It doesn't grow like this. Like, the more you learn and the more you network and the more you connect, like, you'll keep growing like this. No. It's going to be like this. And then at a certain point in time, it's just going to start compounding, right? Until the sky is the limit. So here's to everyone's success. There's definitely enough opportunities, I think, for talent to rise up and succeed. Fantastic. Another thing you mentioned maybe before we wrap up is, so you're launching a community. Alex, tell us about this community. What is the goal? Who are you looking to get involved, and how can people learn more about it?
So I've been bitching about this. Like, one of the problems that I'm seeing in Web3 is that, like, you see all these exclusive clubs. It's exclusive club for that. It's exclusive club for that. You can only get into this event because only if you work for this company, or if you do this, if you do that. So my goal is to make this exclusive but not exclusive at the same time. So like, if you're really like committed to learn more about the space and more about like marketing in general, like that's one of the reasons why I'm launching the community. The majority of my audience are like Web2 marketers transitioning, and Web3 marketers like trying to learn more and trying to get inspiration from like other people, and to try to network with like marketers that are working for like big companies. So I think that's the most important thing for me, and like that's one of the reasons why I want to launch this community, and like why it sits so strongly with me, because I want education to be at the forefront or of everything that I'm doing in the space. I think the podcast is amazing, but I don't think it's enough, and I don't think it reaches like an enough number of people. So I think like if I have the resources, or like if I have the network to build more in regards to that, this is something that I want to do. I'm also launching um, I don't know, a database of people in collaboration with Eden, that through some through which companies that could like browse and see if they want to hire marketers, if that would be like a good option for them, instead of like hiring like external recruiters and for them to like scout on LinkedIn and so on. I think this could be like a very good starting point to with like hundreds of different types of marketers that are looking for jobs or for clients or whatever. So I think that's one of the things that I'm building right now. I've wanted a job for like the longest time in Web3 as well, because I feel like I have like such a big network, and I feel like I've built this for myself, and I think I can bring so much value to other founders or to other companies. I do still believe that I don't have enough as many chances as men in this space, as this recruiter told me. But at the same time, I want to make sure that while I'm building my community and like my reputation, my brand, and so on, I can also help companies like grow through all the resources that I've built for myself. So yeah, if there's anybody hiring there, I would love to have a chat, or if I can contribute in any sorts of ways. I think I would love to discuss, because you never know what opportunities appear, and you always want to make sure you're the first to have that convo.
100%. And I feel like we're in such a niche within a niche with the podcast that,
Yeah.
like, I realize this podcast is not going to get 10,000 or 100,000 views, and that's okay. We're talking about something very, very specific, and hopefully, again, it will attract, whether it's your podcast or this podcast. I think we have very similar missions. Will attract at least a few eyeballs, which will gain some value from the content that we're providing here, and B, maybe someone's ears will perk up and they'll be like, wait a sec, I could use, like, Alex could help. And they will contact you. So on that note, we can wrap it up. How can people find you and or your community, Alex?
I wanted to say that before I tell you where to find me, I wanted to say that people have found jobs through my podcast, or like they found clients
Oh,
because they
wonderful.
found
That's
each other through the podcast.
what, like through the comments, or like how do people unite around a podcast?
No, there was somebody who was working for a company looking for an SEO, like a Web3 SEO guy, and somebody who does
Uh-huh.
SEO was on my podcast, and they reached out, and I think
Love
this
it.
guy got like 2 contracts through the podcast.
That's
So I
so
think that's
very cool.
amazing. Um, that's like one of the ways that I'm helping the industry grow and like become better. Also, you can find me Alexandra Nicorici on LinkedIn. I'm not super active there, but I'm still active, and I have quite a big community there. I'm more active on Twitter at Frogule, Frogule, on Forecaster as well, on Telegram as well. So I think I'm pretty easy to find. So there, I'm trying to, as much as possible, to like bring resources, tell you how my experience is, and like that's kind of my place to talk about like my experiences, and to be more real. Where I feel like LinkedIn kind of put me in a box, and I have to look a certain type of way. But I think I've built such an amazing group of people that are following me, that are like interact with me, that like think the same as me on Twitter. And even at ECC, I met so many people that knew me. I'm like, oh my God, he's like, oh, I know you from Twitter. I'm like, this is amazing. So it's really encouraging to see that this is how what I'm doing is helping the industry grow. And I can't wait to see what else is going to happen till like next ECC, let's say.
Brand building in Web3, and in an industry that moves at the speed of light. Alex, this has been a pleasure. Such a great conversation. I can't wait until the next one, whether it's another podcast episode down the road or the next event. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the insights, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you, and thanks for everybody listening. And yeah, I'll see you next time.
Take care.